And we didn't meet, but we had a little conversation on the phone. And I was going there to make a movie. And it was the first time I was ever in Las Vegas in my life. I was going to make a movie in the desert outside, Western.
For generations, Gregory Peck has been remembered as the gentleman of old Hollywood, the man with impeccable grace and a spotless reputation. But that reputation hid a truth the public never fully grasped. Long before he became a pillar of cinematic history, Peck found himself caught in a secret that challenged every value he was known for. A love he wasn't supposed to feel, a choice he couldn't undo, and a chapter he kept silent about until years after it ended. His passing in 2003 marked the end of an era, yet very few understood the emotional weight he had carried through it all. Behind the legend was a man whose life was far more complicated than his roles ever revealed. The pain that forged Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck's story doesn't open like a golden age Hollywood fairy tale. He entered the world on April 5, 1916, in sun-soaked San Diego, California. But behind that warm setting was a family unraveling long before he ever understood it. His parents were mismatched from the start, and by the time he was 5, he was watching their marriage dissolve right in front of him. His mother, Bunny Peck, tried to hold things together. Divorce was incredibly rare at the time. Only a small fraction of couples ever went that route, yet she filed for one anyway, withdrew it, then filed again, and finished the process a few months later. Gary Fishgall, in his detailed biography, Gregory Peck, paints a picture of tension behind closed doors. Bunny accused her husband, known as Doc, of verbal abuse, violence, jealousy, and even preventing her from receiving medical treatment during a life-threatening burst appendix. A restraining order was issued, astonishing for that era. But years later, Gregory would insist none of it ever happened. Still, Fishgall's research suggests at least some of her claims likely held truth. As painful as the divorce was, something even more heartbreaking followed. When custody came into question, both parents stepped back. Neither wanted to be responsible for raising their only son. In that devastating moment, his grandmother stepped forward and opened her door to him. She became the steady figure in his life, even if history never made it clear how equipped she was for the role. What she did give him, though, would shape the man he became. Once a week, she dressed him up and took him to the movies. He watched everything on the marquee. Those darkened theaters, crowded with strangers and flickering dreams, planted the seed of his future. Not every outing was joyful. When he was 9, she took him to see The Phantom of the Opera, and the fear shook him so deeply that he crept into her bed to sleep beside her that night. Some family members worried he was growing too soft, too sensitive. In response, his parents, distant but suddenly opinionated, decided to toughen him up. And just like that, his world shifted again. Life with his grandmother was stable, gentle, and full of Saturday cinema adventures. But just as he reached 10, her health collapsed. Stomach cancer slowly consumed her, and Gregory watched it happen from the room next door. In Michael Friedland's biography, he describes a child lying awake at night, listening to her pain, helpless. He would read to her in the mornings, trying to offer comfort she could not receive. Years later, in an interview with Irish America, he remembered the strength she carried into death, and also the groans in the dark, sounds he said he could still hear decades later. Then came the moment that altered everything. His parents arranged for him to be sent away to a Catholic cadet school. On the day he left, he kissed his grandmother goodbye, unaware that it would be the last moment he would ever spend with her. She died while he was gone, leaving him without the one person who had chosen to love and raise him. With her gone, his parents could no longer hide in the background. One of them had to return to the responsibility they had once rejected, and Gregory Peck's childhood shifted once again, abruptly, painfully, and permanently. What he endured in those early years didn't just shape him. It steeled him, pushed him, and set him on a path that would eventually carry him far beyond the heartbreak of San Diego. The unexpected path to Hollywood glory. Young Gregory Peck found himself back under his father's roof, attending San Diego High School and moving forward into adulthood one uncertain step at a time. By 1934, he had transferred to a teacher's college, and this is where everything truly shifted. Theater called to him, louder than anything else. He took acting and public speaking classes, and he excelled effortlessly. The academic side of teaching, though, that connection never happened for him. He felt it deep down, even if he couldn't yet fully admit it. And then came the plot twist that didn't make much sense, not to anyone watching, and certainly not in hindsight. Instead of embracing the stage, he decided to pursue medicine, a decision that looked noble on paper, but was doomed from the moment it was made. He enrolled at UC Berkeley with big dreams and only $26 a year to pay for classes. That tiny fee was still a mountain to climb for a young man scraping by. So he went looking for work and landed a job that raised eyebrows everywhere he went. Peck became a hasher, a kitchen helper, serving meals and washing dishes. But what really shocked people wasn't the job. It was where he worked, inside the Gamma Phi Beta sorority house. Inside that kitchen stood this towering, broad-shouldered rower, ladling out soup and flipping pancakes for a room full of stunned young women. His voice worked just as hard as his arms, deep, smooth, warm enough to stop someone mid-conversation. Soon that voice became impossible to ignore. One acting coach heard it and immediately recognized a spark waiting to ignite. This was the moment Peck's path cleared. Acting wasn't just something he was good at, it was the thing he was born for. He switched out of medicine, stepped onto the stage, and threw himself into performance. 5 productions during his senior year alone. Berkeley, he later said, was the greatest chapter of his life. He left feeling ready for the world. But the world expected credentials, and Peck was missing one crucial piece, a final required class. Restless and impulsive, he walked away without a degree and headed straight for New York City, chasing Broadway with nothing but talent and ambition in his pockets. He enrolled at the prestigious neighborhood playhouse for acting lessons. But while he trained among the elite, he was spending nights in some dangerous places. At his lowest, he slept in Central Park, tall frame curled beneath the trees, hoping morning would bring opportunity instead of cold. To survive, he took whatever work he could find. He barked at crowds during the 1939 World's Fair, his voice pulling people toward attractions. He became a page at Rockefeller Center and gave tours through Radio City Music Hall. These jobs weren't passion, just stepping stones between auditions, between dreams. Then it finally happened. Not in New York, but in San Francisco. A role opened in a George Bernard Shaw play, The Doctor's Dilemma, in December 1941, and suddenly, Gregory Peck was earning a real living as an actor. A roof, food, progress. Then, 1 week into the run, the world changed. Pearl Harbor was attacked. America entered World War II. Every able-bodied young man was expected to serve. For someone built like Peck, enlistment seemed inevitable. But there was a secret beneath that strong frame, a crippling back injury, the result of a moment in Martha Graham's movement class. She had pushed him forward, determined to stretch him further, and something inside his lower back snapped loud enough for everyone to hear. The next morning, he couldn't walk. A ruptured disc, a displaced vertebrae, years of recovery ahead. The Army took one look and turned him away. The country lost one more soldier, but Broadway gained a leading man. With so many men overseas, theaters were desperate for actors. Peck filled the gap with force. 50 plays during the war years, 3 hit Broadway, touring, rehearsing, performing non-stop. His career soared while the world was burning, and the stage gave him fame and wide romantic opportunity. While others fought overseas, Peck caught the attention of the women at home. Eventually, one captivated him fully. Greta Kukkonen, a Finnish businesswoman, 5 years older, confident and composed. They married in 1942 and raised 3 boys, fiercely protective of their privacy, refusing magazine spreads and shielding their children from the spotlight. Peck was a devoted father, but marriage demanded more than love. It demanded balance, patience, sacrifice. Fame grew, tension followed, stress tightened around him like rope. By 34, he was overwhelmed, convinced at one point he was suffering a heart attack. Pills, alcohol, pressure, expectations, everything weighed heavy. One explosive argument sent him fleeing into the Mojave Desert, where he spent a month in silence and reflection. In that stillness, he understood the truth he hadn't wanted to face. He could endure the marriage for appearance's sake, for the children, but it would never bring peace. And just as scarcity of men had shaped his early-stage success, it was about to push his career into an even greater transformation, one that would send Gregory Peck from respected stage actor to something much bigger, a star, the bold film that shocked everyone. In 1944, Gregory Peck made the leap that reshaped his entire future. One minute he was a disciplined stage actor, the next he was stepping into the bright, unpredictable world of film. His very first movie was Days of Glory, a story set during World War II, a war he had never touched, never trained for, never marched through. Health issues had kept him far from the battlefield, and suddenly, he was asked to portray something he'd never lived. On top of that, he was a complete newcomer to cinema, still trained in the grand gestures and booming projection of live theater. Hollywood was quieter, more subtle, almost intimate. The director spent countless hours trying to strip away his stage habits and rebuild him for the camera. But when Days of Glory hit theaters, critics didn't hold back. Reviews were harsh, and the New York Times dealt the cruelest blow by calling his performance stiff. Still, Hollywood needed men, needed actors, because the war had drained the industry of talent. So even with bad reviews, Gregory Peck was in demand. This is where he showed nerve. Studio contracts at the time were all but shackles. One studio owned you, chose your films, controlled your destiny. Peck refused. Instead of signing his career away to a single studio, he negotiated non-exclusive contracts with 4. Nobody did that. But Peck walked into Hollywood as a freelancer, free to pick and choose whatever stories offered depth, challenge, and truth. And soon he chose the role that would demand everything from him. The Keys of the Kingdom cast him as a priest whose life unfolds across decades, aging him from his 20s to nearly his 80s right there on screen. It was ambitious, risky, and incredibly demanding. The film itself fell flat, too long, too quiet, too slow for most audiences. Financially, it sank, but critics saw something else entirely. They saw talent, range, potential. Peck earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, suddenly standing among giants despite just stepping off the stage a year earlier. 20th Century Fox had a new star, and they wasted no time shaping his public image. As the war continued, fans wanted to know why such a strong young man wasn't overseas fighting. The truth that he injured his back in dance class didn't match the heroic, masculine persona Fox wanted. So the studio rewrote history, claiming he'd been injured rowing instead. Tougher, cleaner, more noble. With his image polished, Peck kept moving upward. In 1945, he accepted a role in Spellbound, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, with Ingrid Bergman as his co-star. Working with Hitchcock sounded like a dream, but the set told another story. The director kept him at arm's length, cold and disinterested. Peck later learned Hitchcock had wanted Cary Grant for the role and never got over losing him. Still new to Hollywood, Peck forced himself to push past the tension, relying on Bergman's warmth and professionalism to get through each day. Then the tide shifted. Producer David O. Selznick began noticing something unusual during early test screenings. Women in the audience whispered, giggled, practically burst with excitement whenever Peck appeared. The commotion got so loud that men shushed them. And soon, the reaction became even more astonishing. Women started talking before Peck even came on screen. Just seeing his name in the credits was enough to set them off. Spellbound earned 6 Academy Award nominations, but Peck himself walked away with something arguably more valuable: undeniable star power. He learned quickly how to use it. After appearing in The Warm and Gentle, The Yearling, he swung hard in the opposite direction with Duel in the Sun in 1946. It was heated, bold, charged, so much so that audiences renamed it Lust in the Dust. Some critics called it immoral. Some cities banned it entirely. It was the kind of film that could torch a career if handled carelessly. And yet, instead of running from the controversy, Gregory Peck pressed forward, ready to take the next risk, the next challenge, the next leap that could make or break him. Peck's hidden emotional struggles. Now, right after World War II, Gregory found himself stepping into a Hollywood climate buzzing with suspicion. The fear of communism had spread like wildfire, and suddenly fingers were pointing at actors, writers, directors, anyone with influence. Out of that paranoia came the House Committee on Un-American Activities, a group determined to sniff out anyone they believed posed a communist threat. It didn't take long before the whole thing started looking less like protection and more like a full-scale witch hunt. Careers were ruined, reputations shattered, and silence became the easiest form of safety. But Peck wasn't wired for silence. He believed the committee itself was crossing the line, behaving in ways that went against the very American ideals they claimed to protect. So he did something incredibly risky. He signed a bold public letter condemning HUAC, fully aware that he might be trading his Hollywood future for integrity. Courage like that set the tone for the next chapter of his career. Fresh from that political stand, Peck was eager to shape his image into something deeper than the handsome heartthrob label that followed him after Duel in the Sun. In 1947, he took on Gentleman's Agreement, a film that tackled anti-Semitism head-on. His character went undercover as a Jewish man, feeling discrimination firsthand so audiences could confront it too. The film was a sensation, earning 8 Oscar nominations and securing Peck 1 for Best Actor. He wasn't just a movie star anymore, he was a voice. Still, Peck wasn't one to trap himself inside his own principles. After denouncing the anti-communist hysteria, he surprised everyone by playing a Russian in the 1949 film The Great Sinner. It was a move that could have sparked backlash, but instead it gave him something priceless. While filming, he formed the cornerstone of one of Hollywood's most enduring friendships, his bond with Ava Gardner. They stayed close for more than 40 years, and Peck would later describe her as his favorite co-star. That friendship, however, left the world a little puzzled when Gardner passed away at 67. Her death devastated Peck, and in his grief he chose an unconventional tribute. He took her dog and her housekeeper into his care. Not jewelry, not memorabilia, but the living pieces of her daily life. It was strange, tender, and deeply human all at once. Soon after, Peck stepped into a lighter world, comedy. The film was Roman Holiday, released in 1953. But even though he was the established star, all eyes were on Audrey Hepburn. This was her breakout moment, and everyone on the set, Peck included, could see she was about to explode into stardom. Cary Grant had already passed on the film, unwilling to play second lead. Peck didn't mind. What he did mind was the billing. His name was set above the title, hers below. Peck pulled his agent aside, fully aware of the future, and insisted Hepburn deserved equal placement. He still kept his name above hers, but the gesture made one thing clear. He recognized her brilliance before the rest of the world had even caught up. After the film's success, one might assume Peck relaxed somewhere on a beach, soaking in the glory. Instead, he found a different kind of escape. The U.S. tax rate for stars like him was brutal, so he discovered a loophole. Working overseas meant keeping more of his income. That loophole took him across the world to sets in the UK, Germany, and Sri Lanka. It wasn't rest, but it was a strategic kind of holiday, one paid not in sunshine but in freedom from Uncle Sam's reach. What he didn't expect was the bonus that came with it. His international presence grew and grew until critics could hardly ignore him. In 1954, the UK even created a new award category for foreign stars, and Peck was a clear favorite. When the results came in, though, he landed third. And to a man who lived most of his life in the spotlight, third didn't feel heroic. But sometimes the reward isn't a trophy. Sometimes it's softer, quieter, more lasting. Because somewhere in all those years abroad, in the cities and films and friendships scattered across continents, Gregory Peck finished with something far greater than third place. He walked away as number 1 in someone's heart. You see, Peck's first marriage to Greta Kukkonen had been fading long before it officially ended. They were living under one roof, mostly for the sake of their children, going through the motions. doing what looked right on the outside even though the marriage itself had already run dry. But then came the turning point, his meeting with a young French reporter named Véronique Pisani, a spark that would eventually change the trajectory of his life. It was 1952. Peck was headed to Rome to begin filming Roman Holiday, one of the defining movies of his career. Before arriving on set, Paramount asked him to stop in Paris for a media interview with the major French newspaper France Soir. He agreed without much thought, not knowing that the woman who would sit across from him during that conversation was about to become far more than just a journalist with a notebook. From the moment Peck and Pisani met, something clicked between them. He later admitted that he was taken in by her immediately, captivated by her confidence, her sharpness, her intelligence. And Pisani wasn't immune to his charm either. She admired his humility, his calm way of speaking, and found him easy to talk to. Their interview ended as politely as any professional meeting should, but neither of them forgot the other. It felt like a door had opened, even if neither could yet see where it led. At the time, Peck and Greta Kukkonen were already living separate emotional lives. When Greta finally asked for a divorce, it devastated him more than he expected. In searching for comfort, his mind drifted back to Paris, to Véronique. By then, she had moved from France Soir to Paris Press, building a career of her own. Peck reached out. They met again, shared lunch, spent an entire afternoon at the racetrack talking instead of watching horses. And just like that, one meeting turned into many. During the slow divorce process, Peck continued seeing Véronique, and by the time his marriage of 14 years finally ended, their relationship had only grown stronger. On December 30th, 1955, a judge signed the final papers that dissolved his first marriage. The very next day, December 31, Peck married Véronique Pisani in Santa Ynez, California. He was 16 years older, she was 23, and neither seemed to care. Their partnership would last him the rest of his life. Back in America, Peck leaned into both his home life and his career with renewed energy. He adored Véronique deeply and cherished the quiet spaces they shared between films. He once spoke about what drew him to her in the first place: her bright, expressive eyes, her warmth, her intelligence, her humor. He felt anchored by her presence, as though he had finally found the part of himself he had long been missing. Soon after their marriage, Peck jumped into The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, reuniting with his old Duel in the Sun co-star Jennifer Jones. But the atmosphere wasn't friendly. Rumor had it that Jones still harbored tension from their past collaboration. During intense argument scenes, she reportedly clawed at his face so fiercely that Peck approached the director, insisting that personal punches were being thrown under the guise of acting. That uncomfortable dynamic, though, was nothing compared to what awaited him in his next project. Then came Moby Dick in 1956, a film that demanded everything from him. Director John Huston pushed for Peck to take on Captain Ahab, a role fueled by obsession and madness, traits far removed from the calm moral figures Peck was known for. On set, the danger was real. He nearly drowned twice while filming, fighting both the ocean and the character he was trying to inhabit. When the final cut reached theaters, critics weren't convinced. Peck's restrained nature clashed with Ahab's wild fury, and Moby Dick ultimately failed commercially. Yet the story of that film also revealed something deeper about him. Fame hadn't healed his old wounds. In Gary Fishgall's biography, Peck reflected on his childhood, describing a home without warmth, without those ordinary dinner-table conversations most families take for granted. He learned early to lock up his feelings, presenting a polished, agreeable exterior to the world while loneliness and self-doubt pressed quietly beneath the surface. That emotional distance followed him into adulthood, affecting friendships and working relationships alike. While making Moby Dick, Peck and John Huston built what appeared to be a true bond. They shared plans, invested in horses, dreamed of projects they might tackle together. And then, without warning, Peck withdrew completely. Huston was stunned, hurt, unsure what he had done. He wrote later that he valued their friendship too much to simply shrug it off, but he never did get an explanation. The truth was painful. Peck discovered that he hadn't been Huston's first choice for Captain Ahab. The director had originally wanted Orson Welles, and Peck had been selected mainly to secure studio backing. To most actors, that might have been disappointing. For Peck, whose childhood had been shaped by betrayal and abandonment, it felt like history repeating itself. Just like that, he distanced himself from Houston, shutting the door quietly and permanently. Peck's personal sacrifice for the spotlight. The early 60s marked a turning point in Gregory Peck's career, almost like someone hit the reset button and everything powered back up brighter than before. He stepped into the decade with real force, kicking things off in 1961 with the tense thriller Cape Fear. But the momentum didn't stop there. What came next wasn't just another role, it was the role. To Kill a Mockingbird arrived, critics embraced it, audiences cherished it, and history sealed it as his defining performance. The film swept awards, and Peck earned the Best Actor Oscar for bringing Atticus Finch to life. Years later, the American Film Institute named Finch the greatest movie hero of the previous century. A hero without superpowers, costume, or any kind of dramatic flair, just quiet strength and unwavering principle. Yet behind that beloved performance sits a surprising detail. Before accepting the role, Peck pushed for more focus on Atticus. Harper Lee's original novel mainly centered on the children, but Peck believed the weight of the story should grow around the father instead. It sounded selfish at first glance, asking for more of the spotlight, but the final product proved that shift worked. The film became sharper, more grounded, and arguably more powerful because of it. Audiences tended to see Peck as one of those rare Hollywood icons untouched by scandal. Calm, elegant, dignified. But life doesn't grant anyone immunity from heartbreak. In 1975, he faced something no parent is built to endure: the loss of a child to suicide. His son, Jonathan Peck, seemed to have everything ahead of him: good looks, kindness, sharp intellect, and compassion that ran deep. After college, he joined the Peace Corps, spending years in Tanzania developing agricultural programs and writing the curriculum entirely in Swahili. When he came home to California, he moved into media. First radio in Los Angeles, then television in Santa Maria. He earned a reputation for being polite, serious, focused. He didn't waste time on parties or the typical youthful chaos. He worked with intention. But beneath the control and discipline, colleagues sensed something more fragile. An uneasiness he kept hidden, emotions he refused to confront. One summer evening, after calling his boss to say he was struggling to find stories, then receiving a new assignment that even lifted his spirits, everything collapsed. Later that night, Jonathan ended his life. He was only 31. When the tragedy struck, Gregory Peck was living in France. News of Jonathan's death reached him from across an ocean. According to Michael Friedland's biography of Peck, the actor had always been close to his children and knew his son was going through a difficult time. Heartbreak from a breakup, overwhelming pressure in journalism, health issues, and the lingering trauma of a former girlfriend's suicide. Peck had offered money, urged him to see a therapist, tried gently to guide him toward help. Still, he carried a heavy regret for the rest of his life. He believed that if he had been in Los Angeles instead of abroad, Jonathan might have come to him that night like he often did when things felt unbearable. It became a wound he never fully learned to close. His wife at the time, Veronique Passani, later described his grief as crushing, something that shook him to the core. He questioned himself constantly, his role as a father, the choices he made, the ones he didn't. Ultimately, it was family that kept him standing, even when meaning felt impossible to reach. And the family's pain didn't stop there. Peck's youngest son, Anthony, battled demons of his own. His drug addiction swallowed opportunity after opportunity, fraying relationships and sabotaging the privileged path he could have walked. His marriage to supermodel Cheryl Tiegs fell apart, leaving him stunned and unmoored. Alcohol only deepened the spiral, and there was real, terrifying concern that he might follow the same road Jonathan did. The fear hung over the household like a shadow, history threatening to repeat itself. For Gregory Peck, the aftermath of Jonathan's death was so overwhelming that he stepped away from acting entirely. 2 years passed before he returned to work. In public, he remained the steady figure audiences admired, But privately, he was a father carrying a weight that never truly left him. The awful ending and tragic death of Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck is often remembered as the polished, noble figure of classic Hollywood, the man with spotless grace and an untouchable image. But behind that immaculate reputation sat a truth he kept tucked away for decades. Because once upon a time, long before legacy and legend settled around his name, Peck found himself tangled in a love that society would have called forbidden. It happened in 1945, right in the middle of his rise, when his life already included a wife waiting at home and the expectations of Hollywood resting on his shoulders. On the set of the psychological thriller Spellbound, something unexpected sparked. Peck fell deeply for his co-star Ingrid Bergman. Their chemistry wasn't just cinematic, it was real, immediate, and powerful. The two drifted into a hidden world of emotion, one that stayed secret for years, almost as if it belonged to the shadows between takes and studio walls. Rumors of the affair first surfaced not through tabloids, but from someone who had been there, a cast member who later shared with author Lawrence Leamer that one morning both Bergman and Peck arrived late, looking a bit rumpled, as if the night had held its own private story. The detail eventually resurfaced in David Smith's 2012 biography, Ingrid Bergman, The Life, Career, and Public Image, a book many admirers still view as one of the most honest accounts of Bergman's life. Peck himself didn't openly acknowledge the relationship until years later, long after Bergman had passed. When interviewed by People magazine's Brad Derrick, he spoke warmly of the many women he had worked with through the decades: Ava Gardner, Audrey Hepburn, Sophia Loren, and more. But when Bergman's name entered the conversation, the tone shifted. Peck admitted that, with her, things were different. He described her as a lovely Swedish rose, and though he refused to spill details, he did reveal what mattered most. He had truly loved her, and that was where he chose to leave it. Decades passed, films were made, awards collected, and Gregory Peck became a monument in cinema history. And then in June 2003, time finally caught up with him. He died peacefully at 87, his wife Veronique holding his hand as he slipped into rest. News of his passing rippled across the world, stirring grief in fans and colleagues who had grown up with his presence. Nearly 3,000 people came to his public memorial, so many that ushers had to quietly filter guests using a single password: Atticus. For a man whose portrayal of Atticus Finch changed film forever, no word could have been more fitting. His death felt like the closing of old Hollywood's golden book. Frank Pearson, then president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, said he was the last of the true aristocrats of that era. Jack Valenti of the Motion Picture Association echoed the sentiment, calling Peck a towering figure whose films revealed profound truths about character. The American Film Institute promised to preserve his work, protecting his legacy like a treasure from another time. Yet what made Peck remarkable stretched far beyond the screen. He spent his life advocating for peace, supporting cancer research, and speaking up when it mattered most. And in the end, he never wanted praise for it. He once admitted he felt embarrassed being labeled a humanitarian. He simply believed in doing what was right and acted accordingly. His story is one of brilliance and complexity, an actor admired as upright and noble, yet human enough to love imperfectly. Gregory Peck lived boldly, worked passionately, and left behind a legacy that continues to glow long after the curtain fell on his final scene.